Countless books have already been written about this sadistic doctor from the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. And the question still remains unanswered. How can a person sink to such a savage state? Beginning. Joseph Mengele was born into a wealthy bourgeois family, in which besides Joseph there were two other children, elder Alois and younger Karl. The father of Joseph, Karl Mengele, and the mother, Walburga, dreamed that their son would follow in his father's footsteps and lead the family business, the agricultural equipment manufacturing company, Mengele & Sons. However, Mengele, the middle son, chose a different path for himself. From his youth he was interested in two things: racial theory and biology. In Bavaria, nationalist movements were popular at that time, especially the NSDAP, Adolf Hitler's party. In 1932, the young Mengele joins the Nazi organization Steel Helmet, which will soon merge with the NSDAP. Mengele even managed to become a member of the SA militant squad. However, due to poor health, more likely it was just an excuse, he was unable to participate in sorties and stormtrooper fights. Joseph chose a different path. He enrolled at the University of Munich in the Faculty of Medicine and Anthropology. Mengele decided that as a medical researcher, he would be more useful to the National Socialist movement. From all of the above, it is clear that Joseph Mengele consciously took on his role as a sadistic executioner in a white coat. However, it was not the Auschwitz concentration camp and other similar camps created by Nazi Germany that made Mengele a fiend. It was Nazis like Mengele and others like him who made Auschwitz and other concentration camps the most terrible place on earth. In 1938, having received a medical degree, Mengele got a job at the Institute of Hereditary Biology and Racial Hygiene, where he became an assistant to the famous German doctor Othmar von Warscher, who was interested in the physiology of twins. Under the guidance of Professor Warscher, Mengele defended his doctoral dissertation. From that moment on, twins and children with physiological abnormalities became his forte. Second World War. By this time, Mengele was already a member of the SS. With the beginning of World War II, he was mobilized into the army, but stayed in the Wehrmacht no more than a month. Soon he was transferred to the Reserve Medical Battalion of the Waffen-SS. Until 1942, Mengele fought with SS Viking Division, where he was wounded. After recovering at the end of 1942, he was on leave due to an injury, and at the beginning of 1943, with the rank of SS Hauptsturmführer, he was assigned to the Auschwitz concentration camp. Here, Joseph Mengele gave free rein to all his secret unhealthy passions and tendencies, which he covered up with benefit for science and research purposes. Mengele personally met the arriving trains with prisoners at Auschwitz. First and foremost, he was interested in children, especially twins, siblings, children with any physical disabilities, etc. He even ordered the concentration camp guards to wake him up in the middle of night if there was something interesting from his psychopathic point of view in the arriving batch of prisoners with children. He was not at all interested in the feelings and suffering of his so-called patients, whom he looked at guinea pigs. Laboratory. By order of the chief physician of Auschwitz, Edward Worth, Mengele was essentially provided with an entire laboratory for conducting his horrific experiments. The experiments were really terrifying. The Dr. Mengele, devoid of compassion, could attempt to separate Siamese twins if the unfortunate ones fell into his clutches. Or, on the contrary, from the normal twins, he tried to, so to say, glue Siamese twins. Mengele irradiated pregnant women with X-rays, subjecting them to daily procedures. At the same time, the duration, for example, the dose of X-ray exposure, continuously increased, and this crazy researcher, with a devilish smile, observed the condition of the mother and the developing of the fetus. He generally always smiled. Nobody has ever seen the doctor in a bad mood. Subjecting another victim, a woman or a child, to some terrible experiment, he could whistle his favorite tune, joke with the patient, and even encourage them. Mengele was generally a very caring doctor. He always demanded that his victims, while they were needed, be fed tolerably well and not be involved in any work. Uncle Joseph, or Uncle Mengele, that is how he asked his little victims to address him. He could treat a child to a chocolate bar, a cookie, or a candy, pat them on the head and say something gentle, after which the kind uncle would place the child on the operating table and start his terrible experiments without any anesthesia. Fascist doctors in general preferred to perform the most monstrous experiments on people without anesthesia. They apparently liked to observe the suffering of the victim. It was, of course, the purity of experiment and the benefit for science. Dr. Mengele also tried for the sake of science. And he tried really hard, for which he was recognized with awards and accolades from his superiors. For example, Mengele was awarded the medal for the care of German people. It is hard to establish what he did for the German people, but representatives of other nations were better off not meeting this devil incarnate. Test subjects. About the sadistic doctor, a lot of interesting things were told by the family of Romanian Jews of Vitz. The peculiarity of this large family was that both dwarf and people of normal height were born in the family. The family earned a living by giving concerts, singing songs, performing skits, until they ended up in a concentration camp. Probably it was this unique feature of the family, the birth of children of different heights, from dwarf to normal, that saved them. Mengele was very interested in the Vitz family. He studied them for a long time, took all sorts of tests and treated them rather mercifully, not subjecting them to overly painful and dangerous experiments. According to the recollections of the family members, who were given a separate room by Mengele's orders, the doctor often visited them, loved to chat with them and listen to their singing. As the members of the Vitz family said, they were saved by the devil himself. However, few patients of Dr. Death, as the prisoners called Mengele, were so lucky. Most of the prisoners who fell in the hands of this so-called researcher either couldn't withstand the doctor's experiments or became disabled, unfit for work or for further experiments, which meant death for them. The camp administration dealt with Dr. Death patients who had become unnecessary to him quickly and quietly, to the gas chamber and to the crematorium. Joseph not only used his own prisoners, he also helped his colleagues. For example, Mengele periodically shared reports on his research with Warschauer, as well as with another Nazi medical scientist, Adolf Butenandt, a world-renowned scientist and Nobel laureate. Butenandt was working on a drug for Luftwaffe pilots, and Mengele shared with him the livers of his victims, necessary for the production of the ingredients for Butenandt's drug. After the war. After the war, neither Warschauer nor Butenandt were held accountable. On the contrary, both occupied important positions after the war. Only at the end of the last century, when the connection of these scientists with Mengele and his research was proven, the organization in which Warschauer and Butenandt worked apologized to the victims of Nazi experiments and their relatives. Mengele himself successfully escaped from the concentration camp with the approach of the Soviet troops. The first few years he did not even particularly hide, living in Germany, albeit under a different name. His whereabouts were not initially sought, as the activities of the Auschwitz doctor became known only in the 1950s. By that time, Mengele was already in Latin America. He never stayed anywhere for long, moved from Argentina to Paraguay, then to Brazil, changed names and addresses, successfully evading Mossad agents, the Israeli intelligence agency that was trying to bring him to justice. The executioner torturer died of natural causes in Brazil in 1979. Mengele, never brought to trial along with his other colleagues, Irma Gries, Rudolf Haas, Karl Kloberg, Marie Mengele and other Nazi criminals, justly convicted after the war. However, he still could not avoid the judgment of history.